Now, as Israel prepares its ground offensive in Gaza, world leaders are struggling to find ways to de-escalate the conflict, provide humanitarian assistance to civilians, and also accelerate the release of hostages. Here's all you need to know on the latest developments. Israeli ground offensive off the war-battered Palestinian enclave appeared imminent as formations of Israeli tanks and other military equipment were seen positioning around Gaza's border in southern Israel. In the latest, the Pentagon has moved to step up its military readiness in the region, and it's ordering activation of air defense systems throughout the region and alerting additional U.S. forces that they may be deployed soon. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said in a statement that the moves were in response to recent escalations by Iran and its proxy forces across West Asia. Austin, however, did not say how many additional U.S. troops would be deployed to the region. Israeli aircraft struck a compound beneath a mosque in West Bank. Israel said that it was being used by militants to organize attacks. It further said that the compound beneath the Al-Ansar Mosque belonged to operatives from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad who were responsible for attacks in recent months. Earlier, Israel's military spokesman Daniel Hagri said that Israel will continue to attack in the area of Gaza City. Hamas said that at least 55 people were killed in overnight raids on the Gaza Strip.
לביטחונכם האישי, נו דרומה, אנחנו נמשיך לתקוף באזור העיר עזה ביתר שאת ונגביר את התקיפות. הציוד ההומניטרי שנכנס לאונר"א, עליו אנחנו מפקחים, זה שנכנס ממצרים, עליו אנחנו מפקחים עכשיו בבסיסי אונר"א לוודא שהמים, התרופות והאוכל מחולקים לאותו אזור הומניטרי שקבענו.
Now, the Hamas militants have claimed that they wanted to release 2 more hostages on humanitarian grounds, but Israel declined to receive them. Israel has described it as a propaganda. In a brief statement, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said, "We will not refer to false propaganda by Hamas." Hundreds of demonstrators, including family of those missing after October 7th Hamas attacks, protested in central Tel Aviv, demanding the government to take immediate action to return their loved ones being held hostage by Hamas. Hamas has said it took about 200 hostages during a deadly October 7th rampage. Several countries have come forward to negotiate for hostages with Hamas. Qatar has emerged as a significant player here. Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesman has now said that hostages could be released very soon. Now, it is continuously engaging with both Israel and Hamas for the release of all civilians. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden said that he was talking to the Israelis when asked whether he's encouraging them to delay an invasion of Gaza.
Mr. President, are you going to delay? Are you encouraging the Israelis to delay invasion? Mr. President, are you going to delay? Are you encouraging the Israelis to delay invasion?
Talking to the Israelis.
This comes as a peace summit was held in Egypt's capital, Cairo, to discuss the Israel-Hamas war. It aimed at de-escalating the conflict and providing humanitarian aid for civilians in the Gaza Strip. More than 20 prime ministers, foreign ministers and regional leaders took part in the meeting, while Arab and Muslim states called for an immediate end to Israel's offensive. Western countries mostly voiced more modest goals, such as humanitarian relief for civilians. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had made a visit to the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip in a bid to get aid flowing into Gaza. He talked about the visit at the meeting.
Yesterday, I went to the Rafah border crossing. There I saw a paradox, a humanitarian catastrophe playing out in real time. On the one hand, I saw hundreds of trucks teeming with food and other essential supplies. On the other hand, we know that just across the border, there are 2 million people without water, food, fuel, electricity, and medicine. Children, mothers, the elderly, the sick. Full trucks on one side, empty stomachs on the other.
Now, earlier on Saturday, 20 trucks carrying aid crossed into Gaza, and this is the first convoy of humanitarian supplies since Israel began its siege 12 days ago. Meanwhile, presidents of northern Israel and both sides of Israel-Lebanon border are now fearful of a second front of conflict escalating. And this comes as Israel said its aircraft struck Hezbollah targets in Lebanon on Saturday and that one of its soldiers were hit by an anti-tank missile. While the Iran-backed group said that the strike killed 6 of its fighters, Israel is facing strong opposition from the United States, which also fears a two-front war, which would risk igniting a major regional conflict. And joining me now is Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, International Affairs Analyst, author and historian. Welcome to the broadcast, Dr. Gilbert.
Good to speak to you.
I would like to begin with the first most important thing which is at the core of this war that has been going on for more than 2 weeks. An aftermath of the Israel-Hamas conflict is a deepening humanitarian crisis. Civilians being killed on both sides, hostages held, women, children, elderly. 2.1 million civilians in besieged Gaza had been denied further access to food, water, fuel, electricity. And that's a huge population scrambling for basic resources. And finally, when aid was let in through the Rafah crossing for Gazans, it was far from enough. How long until civilians continue to suffer?
Well, this is now being described not as a catastrophe, and I agree with that. Each of us can watch on major international global broadcasters scenes from Gaza, scenes of horror that you have just described. They are being carried by major media. That means the world public is seeing exactly what's going on and is in a state of shock. How long this can continue when the reports of deaths from lack of medicine, lack of electricity in hospitals will be on the screen is a matter of conjecture. But that it is a war crime is obvious to anyone by any standard measure of war crimes. So Israel is day by day sacrificing whatever support it had from fair-minded and humane, concerned international viewers.
And humanitarian crisis is one. There's also a regional looming crisis, a regional crisis that's looming as the dangers of this war turning into a broader regional conflict stares. Now, just a couple of days back, a Houthi missile was intercepted by a USS warship Carney in the Red Sea. And the cross-border tensions also going on between Israel and Lebanon are on the rise. Now, the spillover of this into a regional war can be catastrophic.
Well, the point that I want to bring to your viewers' attention is the danger of a regional war itself instantly becoming a global war. We speak about this region and the small size of Israel, all the small distances between Israel, Syria, Lebanon. What you're missing is one point. That is, Russia is in the middle of it all. Russia has an air base at Khmeimim or Latakia, which has a signal intelligence center. That is to say, the Russians are intercepting everything that has been going on in the region and are well aware of the risks to themselves as well as to their allies. They have 30 or more planes on that base. They also have their only naval base in the Eastern Mediterranean at the Syrian port of Tartus. So Russia is a regional player, which you're not including in the equation. It's one thing to speak about China sending 6 naval vessels to Western Asia. It's another thing to say the Russians are there with troops on the ground. Another minor detail, which is not so minor, we speak about Hezbollah, who are the ones who are heating up the war with Israel on a second front, and which will become an all-out war is if and when the Israelis proceed with their ground invasion of Gaza. Yes, they are a cat's paw of Iran, but that's not the whole story. Hezbollah has worked very closely in cooperation with Russia. During the Syrian civil war from 2015 to 2018, Hezbollah on the ground were coordinating all of their activities with Russia in the air because Russia had air dominance and was the major factor in destroying Islamic State and other terrorist group infrastructure on the territory of Syria. So the dimension here, the international dimension, has to be spoken about as we also speak about a regional dimension.
I would also now like to talk about the hostage situation at the moment. On one hand, Israel says it's focusing on readiness of forces for the next stage. And on the other, there are worldwide protests that are surging to end the war that has dragged on for over 2 weeks now, and also growing anger for not enough being done for the release of the hostages. What happens to the hostage situation if Israel goes full frontal on Hamas in Gaza?
Well, it was very heartening yesterday to hear about the release of 2 American hostages.
Sure.
Because it indicated that there are some negotiations possible. It's one thing to denounce the Palestinians as animals, as the Israeli president unfortunately did. It's another thing to enter into normal diplomatic negotiations that result in concrete positive results, which is what happened in the Qatari negotiations that resulted in the release. The fact that 20 trucks with emergency humanitarian aid were allowed to cross the border from Egypt into Israel was the response, the normal civilized response of Israel to this token release of hostages. Token release of hostages, token admission of humanitarian aid to Palestine. Let us hope that this continues, because if this approach is used, then the Israeli invasion of Gaza will be postponed indefinitely. And that is obviously the intention of Hamas, and it's also very desirable for the international community to cool this thing down before it spills over.
Sure. But according to Israel, 2 American hostages that were released, who were released by Hamas, they've labeled that as propaganda.
Well, this is, you can say whatever you like when you're in power. Whether it's propaganda or not, it's a reality. These are not empty words. These are 2 people whose lives have been saved. And they hold the promise of more from the 200 hostages being held, also saved. So propaganda points are irrelevant to the humanitarian mission today of saving lives and cooling things down, preventing an instant invasion of Gaza, which will surely do what you asked about at the start of this interview. It will ensure the full-scale entry of Hezbollah into the battle and make it a regional war.
To sum this all up, Mr. Gilbert, what is the need of the hour right now? Yesterday, the world leaders gathered at the Cairo summit where nothing significant was concluded, or no significant agreement or consensus was reached. However, yes, aid did come in, but again, not enough, far from enough for the 2.1 million civilians in Gaza. So what do you think is the need of the hour right now?
What we need right now is for European leaders to come to their senses. They are living in a bubble. The reason why nothing was accomplished yesterday at this important conference in Egypt was that the European leaders don't get the scope of the danger to themselves. Yesterday, the leading candidate for election as the next prime minister in Netherlands spoke to the press, and this was in today's Financial Times, saying that, yes, this terrible situation in the Middle East can cause us problems in Europe because of the political divides that it opens up in our own populations. Well, that's true, but that is not the threat to Europe. The threat to Europe is the loss of all gas, because Qatar, if this proceeds, Qatar has already said to Chancellor Scholz when they visited a week ago that they will stop gas deliveries. The economic impact of this on Europe will be direct. The possibility of spillover of the war in Palestine to Europe is not appreciated yet by the European leaders, and therefore they took this mealy-mouthed and virtually useless positions at yesterday's conference. They have to start thinking, put on a thinking cap.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much for your time and insights.
Thank you for having me.